today's episode, we are going to be talking about feeling guilty of being successful, which kind of sounds a little ass backwards, right? You typically hear people talk about how proud they are of their success, but what can also coexist with that pride is guilt. And just before we continue, let's get some language clear here because I do think that shame and guilt are sometimes, actually, a lot of times, used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. Guilt says that you have done something wrong or something bad. And shame says that you, the person, are bad. Okay. So now that that's out of the way, I want to share that, I felt a ton of guilt when I started to make money. Like I had actually done something bad. And, I had to sit with that. I remember speaking to my therapist about this extensively and really processing all of the stuff that came up for me. And it was wild, right? Because this is why my family came to this country. This is why they made all the sacrifices that they made. It's so that I could actually take advantage of opportunities in this country and arrive at this very moment. So, why did I feel so wrong? Turns out that I was experiencing a sort of survivor's guilt. And if you don't know, survivor's guilt is a response to an event in which someone else experienced loss, but you didn't. It's typically used when discussing tragedies like a fire, like a plane crash, in which a family member, you don't even have to be a family member, but in which someone survives and others don't. And so even though that's usually the context in which it's used, it is appropriate in other contexts as well, just talking about things that are important to people. And so when I looked at this more closely and I took it a step further, I realized that I was actually afraid of no longer belonging in my working class family and community, or not fitting in with friends that, were making less money than me or didn't experience the same types of successes that I was experiencing. And listen, don't get me wrong here. No one said this to me explicitly. My people were happy for me. They are happy for me. And still, there was this nagging feeling that I was in danger in some way if I had changed in this way. And then I was called a sellout by a colleague of color for, I can't remember, but it was 175 or $200 a session at that time when I was a therapist, further making me feel like not only was I wrong for charging accordingly, but that I was a traitor to my community for doing so. Y'all, it was a lot. It was a time was had in my therapist's office. Like, it was a lot. And even though it was uncomfortable, I knew better than to pretend that, that I wasn't experiencing what I was experiencing. Like, I was not going to gaslight myself, right? I had to be with this. And not necessarily with what, my colleague had said. Like, that was 100% his stuff and his projection, his attempt, right, to project things onto me. But I had to be with all the other stuff. Your business is a mirror, and it amplifies all of the things that lurk in the shadows, all of the things that are beneath the surface, all of the things that we just prefer to not deal with. And I was chilling in the shadows. I was like, what is happening here? I'm very clear on the legacy that I want to have. I'm very clear on my purpose in this lifetime. I will not, I just prefer to not have these things that are out of my awareness kind of get in the way. And in that process, I had to get really clear about what qualified me to belong to the communities that I belong to and what were the things that threatened that belonging. I had to then critically look, at whether those things were actually true and whether they weren't. And spoiler alert, most of them were not true, right? They were just, feelings that I had believed were true, which they weren't. I also had to sit with this toxic belief that I was leaving people behind, in my success, as if, I don't know, somehow I became, a lifesaver, right? Like my role was to save people. So, I had to really look at that and really, had to look at some family of origin themes that were coming up that were tied to this saving people. I also had to stop feeling responsible for my family's circumstances, even those circumstances that were true before I was born. I think that there's a difference between having compassion for someone's struggle and completely taking those things on. And I know this to be extremely common for children of immigrants, by the way. I also think that as black and brown folks, black and brown entrepreneurs in particular, this experience has a certain texture because of the cultural norms or rules in our particular communities. Like, the expectation that you are to provide for your family once you quote unquote make it, right? Like, it's the idea behind the black tax, like that's real. Or this idea that you have to bring people with you as you ascend to make more money, have success, etc. And listen, I am all for that. I really believe that none of us are self made, right? Even if we got to where we are for our own blood, sweat, and tears, our mothers and grandmothers and great grandmothers and titi's prayers are covering us, right? The lessons you learn from your family or your upbringing, I'm sure, are lessons that have contributed to your own success or has served you in some way in your entrepreneurial journey. I think though that when we feel guilt, and not everyone does, right? Like, let's make that very clear. Not everyone feels this guilt, but when we do, it creates problems for us and our businesses. In my work with entrepreneurs of color, I've seen them really undercharge or lowball their services or their products because they feel guilty of where they are, which obviously then causes them to burn out, and they're not good to anyone. They can't do their jobs, they can't serve in the ways they want to serve. I've seen entrepreneurs have really poor boundaries because, they feel so bad, so guilty about their success that they just kind of allow anyone to come in and do whatever they want because of this thinking of, well, I have it better than them, so it's okay. It's not actually. That guilt can be so overwhelming that it can guilt to sabotaging behavior, right? You sabotage money, opportunities, relationships because the feeling of guilt is just so overwhelming that if the opportunities, the money, the relationship is going to exacerbate that feeling, you just prefer to not have it. Like, this stuff can be really deep. As I reflect on this, right, like my own personal experience and my experience supporting entrepreneurs, I think that what's underneath all of this is that you've made it and you simply want to pay it forward. Why? Because you're grateful and you see your success as a gift. If that's what you want to do that, but on your terms. That's the only way that this is going to work, because when you're undercharging, when you're people pleasing, when you're self sabotaging, when you're abandoning yourself, all of that comes from outside expectations. That does not come from within. You have to get really clear on what that would look like for you. You have to set the parameters, right? Because if it doesn't work for you, it simply doesn't work. And also, I think that that's really where the work is. Okay. And where some people get really tripped up. And doing so requires you to become someone who is clear. It requires you to become someone who sets and enforces boundaries. It requires you to become someone who is honest about what they will and what they won't do, what they want, what they don't want. And not just with the world, but with your community, with family, which, listen, it could be tough, especially with family, with friends, right? With the people who are close to you. To wrap up here, having this clarity and leading from a place of gratitude instead of a place of guilt and that, this feeling that you've done something wrong really opens you up to enjoy and truly be proud of your success, which you deserve. Like, you deserve that and so much more. Not only that, but it also allows you to be the type of leader, the type of business owner who can create more opportunities for success and have greater impact, which is what I know that you want. All right, y'all. I hope that was helpful. I'll catch you next week.